Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar of the Inspireurope project. This webinar is called How to Apply for EU Funding for Individual Fellowships. My name is Sinead O'Gorman, and I direct Scholars at Risk Europe. Joining me here today, we have Orla Juk, who is Program Manager at Scholars at Risk Europe. We're hosted at Maynooth University in Ireland. And from Brussels, we have two expert speakers joining us today. We have Martin Mulek of the Marie Curie Skłodowska Actions Unit of the European Commission, and we have Sami Betic of the Research Executive Agency. So thank you to our speakers for joining us, and thank you to you, the attendees, also. We will have about an hour together today in this webinar. I'll begin the webinar by saying some brief words about the Inspireurope project, and we'll point to some opportunities for researchers at risk across Europe and elsewhere to get involved in individual activities. And then we will use the remainder of the time for Martin and Sami to give us a presentation on the EU funding that is available for individual fellowships, and also how to apply in particular for Marie Skłodowska Curie or individual fellowships. A few instructions. So if you have a question or a comment while someone is speaking, either while they're speaking or at the end of their presentation, please look at the bottom of your screen where there is a Q&A button. And if you hit that, and make sure that you tick the box that says send question anonymously if you wish to do so. And then we will read the question and respond to it. So this is especially important as the webinar will be recorded and made available online in a few days' time. So if you do wish to remain anonymous, please hit that send anonymously button. So before we begin, I'd like to just say a few introductory words, as mentioned, about the Inspireurope project. The Inspireurope, it's a 3-year EU-funded project to support researchers at risk in Europe. The project dates are September 1st of last year, 2019, until August 31st, 2022. It includes 10 partners across Europe. The project coordinator is Maynooth University, Ireland, which, as I mentioned, is the host of the Scholars at Risk's European office. Our other partners include the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation in Germany, the European University Association, Jagiellonian University in Poland, the University of Oslo in Norway, the University of Gothenburg, Sweden, the French National Pause Programme, which is hosted by the Collège de France, the UAF in the Netherlands, which is the Foundation for Refugee Students, the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and Scholz CTC in Germany. We also have a number of associate partners involved, including Scholars at Risk national sections in Norway and Switzerland, and an international partner, the Scholars at Risk Network, whose headquarters, as many of you know, is in New York. Euroscience, the University of Padova, and the University of Trento. So when we are using the term researcher at risk, the definitions that we're relying on are the Marie Skłodowska Curie action definition. So a researcher is a person who is active in research, including at a training level of at least postgraduate or equivalent level, and includes all stages of researchers' careers, be they doctoral candidates or highly experienced researchers. And when we use the term at risk, we're using the term that was in the definition of the MSCA work program for the researchers at risk call for proposals. So researchers who are at risk in their countries of origin due to discrimination, persecution, suffering, and/or violence, or are seeking refuge out of these reasons, or have recently found refuge in Europe. What does the project aim to do? First and foremost, we're working to build a long-term cross-sectoral European support structure for researchers at risk. By cross-sectoral, we mean including the academic universities and the academic sector and non-academic sector, including NGOs, industry, and other organizations across Europe. We're aiming to contribute to informed policymaking in Europe on supporting researchers at risk. We aim to bridge the gaps between existing national and European support mechanisms, to improve the career development opportunities for researchers at risk in Europe, to prepare the work environment in Europe, and also to grow the diversity of actors who are supporting researchers at risk. And we have a particular focus in this project on growing support in Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe. How do we do this? We organize regular exchange through a European Coordinating Committee, which includes representatives of all of the partner organizations across Europe who are working to support researchers at risk. We are mapping and analyzing existing support mechanisms for researchers at risk, and we're beginning to formulate policy recommendations as to how this support might be improved. We're organizing mutual learning activities and stakeholder fora to facilitate exchange. So our first stakeholder fora will be held in Paris in June 2020. We're organizing webinars such as this one and trainings for researchers at risk. And we're organizing corresponding webinars and trainings for employers and other hosts across Europe who are interested in employing or hosting researchers. We're also organizing outreach, networking, and awareness raising activities. We held our first activity in this area in Poland, in Krakow, in January, and that was hosted by Jagiellonian University. I wanted to leave you with some invitations to participate in these activities. First and foremost, can you write to us at this email address, inspireurope@mu.ie, if you're interested in staying updated on opportunities to get involved. So you may have heard about this webinar through one of our partner organizations, and those partner organizations will continue to keep you updated directly. If you heard about it through a friend and want to remain on our email lists, can you please just send us a quick email at that address? We would invite you to advise and guide us via consultations that we will invite you to take part in over the coming months. These will all aim to improve the policy environment in Europe for researchers at risk. We have held one focus group in Poland already, including a small number of researchers at risk to begin this process. But again, we hope to extend further invitations over the coming weeks. We invite you to contribute as expert speakers in webinars like this, in trainings and events over the next 3 years. To participate as attendees, as you are doing today, in webinars on career development topics and in face-to-face trainings. We're also looking, we have a preliminary outline of this webinar series, but we really want you as participants in this process to come to us with suggestions for future topics for webinars and related to career development for researchers across Europe. And your suggestions are very welcome at inspireurope@mu.ie. So with that, I'd like to introduce our expert contributors to today's topic. And so Martin Mulek is Policy Officer at the Marii Skłodowska Curie Actions Unit in DG EAC of the European Commission. He contributes to the formulation and implementation of related EU research and development programs and works, among others, on the intersectoral aspects of MSCA, the research and innovation staff exchanges, MSCA support for researchers at risk, as well as the coordination between DG EAC and the REA, the Research Executive Agency, that is. Secondly, we have Sami Vetish, who is Project Advisor at the Research Executive Agency. Sami joined the REA in 2017 as Project Officer, dealing with widening fellowships and Marii Skłodowska Curie individual fellowships, and has worked at the European Commission, DG Research and Innovation as Policy Officer on innovation-related topics. Sami's background is in European law and policy. So welcome, Sami and Martin. I'll hand it over to you for your presentation.
Yes, hello, good morning, hello, have a nice, I hope you have a nice day, and thank you for joining this presentation, the webinar, and I hope it will be as interactive as possible. if you just give me the possibility to switch on the PowerPoints that we have. I think you should be seeing it in an instant. Yes. And you will notice that there will be many slides. They will be made available to you afterwards. And in my first part, I will give you a little bit of an overview of how MSCA, Marie Skłodowska Curie Actions works. How is the what are the different instruments? Before then, we will be my colleague Sammy will introduce you to the details of the individual fellowships. So the key features of Marie Skłodowska Curie Actions are a little bit based also on the life story of Marie Skłodowska Curie. You might know she also had to leave her home country, Poland, which was part of the Russian Empire at that time, and to go to Paris to conduct her studies and basically follow her vocation. It is a program that has already a tradition since 1994. We are funding through MSCA. Previously it was called Marie Curie, and then we know it's called Marie Skłodowska Curie for the last 10 years. We support researchers mobility, and it is a program that is quite successful with an increasing number of researchers joining it. So in the last framework program, which is a 7-year period, we are funding now 65,000 researchers, and we hope to increase that number even further in the next period that starts next year. So what is it about? It is in the foreground, it's the mobility of researchers from all over the world. So it's open to any researcher with any citizenship in the world. It's not limited to Europeans. It is a focus on training, on career development, of changing and expanding the skills that a researcher has. We in particular encourage also academics to link up to the non-academic sector to increase the collaborations with industry, with small and medium enterprises, and we are open to researchers at every stage of their career. The different offers, I come to that in a little moment. What is very important, we are open for all domains of research. It's a bottom-up approach, so whatever your research focus, research priority is, there's no limit to the topics that you can propose and on which you can work on. And we promote that also because we want to be competitive in a global environment for excellent researchers. It's attractive and should be attractive, and also possible for families to join the researchers. So we are financing up to 100% of the fellows, and we do that in an attractive manner. This is a very complicated overview. It's just to show you where the rest of EU research funding goes, where EU research programs are. On the left middle, we have Marie Skłodowska Curie Actions in the area of excellent research, but there's also industrial leadership and societal challenges. So there's a lot of going on. And I really would encourage you also to look at that, especially if you have a particular thematic area on which you would like to work, because on those there are some programs available also for organizations. Some of them might be interesting for you as well. What I in particular can recommend you, there's a funding portal to go and to look at that in detail on the offers, and also to register as an expert, which is a possibility for all kind of researchers that we have. You can register there, and you could be, for example, be invited as a reviewer or an evaluator of the many calls that we are having, which is a very good way to get introduced to how our research programs work. And it is, I think, quite useful to show that. And many people told me that it's also quite useful to have in your city to be an EU expert or evaluator or reviewer. Regarding Marie Skłodowska Curie Actions, in fact, we have essentially 4 actions that we offer with different budget distribution, but we will, for you, we'll focus today on the individual fellowships, and I give you a little bit of an overview of the other 3 that we have there. Co-fund is on the very right side. It's a co-funding of national, international or regional programs. That's very much focused on organizations. And the same applies to RISE, which is staff exchanges that we are funding for consortia of organizations from Europe and also beyond. For you as individual fellowships, the individual fellowships are the most relevant, but you also have the innovative training networks that are for early stage researchers. So PhD students, for example, with up to 4 years in research and no PhD awarded. Our offer for individual fellowships is for experienced researchers, so researchers that have been for more than 4 years in research or have obtained a PhD. And other stuff like managers, technicians, administrators, they can also be involved in MSCA, but mainly in the research innovation staff exchanges. So we allow a quite huge variety of organizations to join projects and fellowships. So the academic sector is open, so higher education, universities, non-profit research organizations, international or European interest organizations, but also we very much encourage then also the non-academic sector to be involved. So large companies, small companies, NGOs, museums, hospitals, international organizations, and so on. And in fact, you will see that there are some advantages for the non-academic sector in our course to allow their participation to be bigger and on the same level than the academic sector. Quickly about the innovative training networks. Those are networks where a group of organizations create a European training network where they have a joint research and training program. There are some other possibilities as well as for joint doctorates and industrial doctorates, which is also a possibility. Very quickly about that, it's mainly for junior researchers that as part of their PhD, or they conduct their PhD as part of this training network. And for you, interesting maybe to know is once a training network has been chosen in the evaluation of a call, then this ITN, this training network, is publishing the open positions on the Euraccess web portal. And there you can look for positions there. So I really recommend you to look at Euraccess regularly for positions that maybe are in your domain and your specialty. Individual fellowships, very quickly, because you will hear a lot about that. So it's about individual transnational fellowships to the best and most promising experienced researchers. The evaluation is mainly about the excellence of researchers. We have secondments that are possible in there. We have certain sub-panels that are for career restart, reintegration, societal enterprise panel. So there's a lot of possibilities as well. Sami, my colleague, will be telling you more about that in a minute. And then there's the research innovation staff exchanges, RISE, where you have secondments between member states, associated countries, and also third countries. So it's also sometimes very useful to link up to countries outside of the European Union in such a part of a secondment-based research project. Here you have an overview of the contribution if you have a fellow and what kind of are the costs that, for example, for the individual fellow and also for the institution. That's maybe for you for future reference. What is very important here is that together with MSCA, with the program, we have also a support structure of national contact points. So there you can go on the website, and if you're interested in a particular country, and for example, you want to apply there, you will have their list of names that you can contact directly and that support you and inform you about the possibilities for you. This might be also in particular interesting if you have a special legal status in a given country. There they should be able to inform you what are your possibilities and what are different eligibilities that you have for certain programs. This is not only for MSCA, but they can also help you for other European funded research programs and calls. The NCP network is not only in the EU, 27 EU member states, but also in the associated countries. So those are the countries of the Eastern neighborhood like Ukraine, the Caucasus countries, Turkey, the Western Balkan countries, Israel, Tunisia. Those are also associated countries, and they have the same rights and the same possibilities to join and also to host, for example, individual fellows. And we also have a network of national contact points in third countries outside of the EU, in South America, Africa, Asia, and North America. So that might be also a possibility to find support and advice. Maybe very interesting for you here, we have our calls for all of our programs are once a year. And as you can see from the dates, that for the ITN, we just after the closure of the last call for and the next one would be in 2021. What is probably most interesting for you are the calls for individual fellowships that are opening and closing in early September, possibly for RISE, which is closing in April, and co-fund also in the autumn. But I think mainly the individual fellowships and the date of the 9th of September is most relevant for you. So a little bit, I have some set downs in the last days and had some ideas of how MSCA can be relevant for researchers at risk. So here are some bullets, some ideas of maybe which can help you maybe orient yourself a little bit and maybe see the opportunities that you might be able to use with Marie Skłodowska Curie actions, especially the individual fellowships. So it's a call for excellent scientists from all over the world. So your nationality does not play a role, or you're not going to be treated differently. Actually, we have a lot of applicants, and the more interesting, the more innovative, the newer your perspective and your approaches to research the problems can be quite helpful also in the evaluation. And it is a call for excellent scientists, so you will be assessed only in relation to the quality of your proposal. We have some measures in place that create a level playing field for people with who have qualified as researchers at risk, who have maybe some gaps in the CV and so on. But actually, this can be used also as by you to say, okay, this is something special. This is the experiences I have, and actually, by identifying and explaining your CV in the application, you actually can have some added value to that, and you have a level playing field with, for example, European researchers that apply for it as well. Maybe it's very important to link up to the host organization, that they can help you as well. We have fellowships that are available for all countries. So you might not want to focus on the country that where you're based at the moment, but you might look at other European countries, associated countries in Eastern and Southern borders of Europe, or third countries. We also have global fellowships, and that might be also possible for you. We encourage also the move between academic and non-academic entities, and especially if you're interested in moving to from a university background to the private sector, to a SME or a larger company. Actually, there's a panel for that, and success chances are even higher, and we support that also academics get closer to the private sector. So you might look for new skills and envisage career changes. And as I mentioned before, there's help available by the national contact points, and also the organizations that, for example, will be hosting the individual fellows. And I really would encourage you to use them, because they have the expertise how to write good proposals, and then they can advise you possibly much better than I actually can do, because they are involved in the writing of proposals. And I would really encourage you to use the help available in those, either the host organization or the national contact points. So that's my point, my short overview. I'm passing on now to my colleague Sami Petish, who will present a little bit the details of the individual fellowships. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. And I'm very happy to be here today and to have the opportunity to present the individual fellowships. So individual fellowship, as mentioned by Martin, is one of the actions that is part of the Skłodowska Curie program. The overall idea of the action is really to support the career development of the researchers through training and training through mobility. So the program, as mentioned by Martin, is open to experienced researcher in that case. What do we mean by experienced researcher? An experienced researcher is a researcher that has obtained his or her PhD, or that can demonstrate 4 years of experience in research. It is open also to any nationality, with some limited conditions in the case of Reintegration Panel and Global Fellowship Panel, but I will come back to that later on. Individual fellowship is based on the researchers, but also on a host institution. And this host institution, that will be the one that will technically apply and sign the grant agreement with us, the research executive agency, can be academic or non-academic. Academic being an institution that is a higher education entity that delivers diploma, or a non-for-profit organization. By default, a non-academic is anything that is not complying with the academic definition. So in most cases, it is indeed, as mentioned by Martin, industry, including SMEs, but it can also be a governmental organization, an hospital, a museum, or an NGO, or even an international organization. This host institution that will submit and sign, submit the proposal and sign the grant agreement should be located in one of the member states of the European Union, or in one of those associated countries that has been mentioned before, and for which you can see the list here on the screen. So any project should be submitted by an host institution that is located in one of those countries. So what is a typical individual fellowship project? First of all, it's a project that can deal, as mentioned before, with any field. It's open to all scientific disciplines. For sake of organization, we have divided all the scientific fields in 8 panels, namely chemistry, social science and humanities, economy, engineering, environmental science, life sciences, mathematics, and physics. And the proposals will be assessed by experts from that field. And in order for us to match your proposal with the right expertise, we will ask you in your application to select keywords. So it's open to all scientific disciplines, and the projects are based on 3 main actors. As I said, there is one host institution that can be academic or non-academic, and that has to be located in a member state or an associated country. In the case of global fellowship, there should also be a partner institution that is located in a 3rd country that is outside Europe at large. Then the second main actor, which is you as a researcher, the projects are focused and centered around the researcher. The researcher should be experienced, meaning having obtained his or her PhD, or should be able to demonstrate 4 years of experience. And it can be of any nationality with the limited condition for integration and global fellowship. And then the 3rd actor is the supervisor, which is, for instance, in the case of an academic institution, is well recognized and established professor that is representing the host institution, and that will guide the researcher and supervise the researchers during the course of the project. In terms of activities, an IF project is focused on training through research, and will aim at supporting the acquisition of not only scientific knowledge and scientific skills like the use of new techniques or new instruments or research infrastructures, but also to gain new horizontal skills that has to do with management, leadership, commercial exploitation, IPR, or skills linked to supervision and mentoring of students or PhD candidates. There's also this possibility to have some knowledge transfer through the secondment of the researchers in another organization that is located in another country, in a member state or an associated country. And this secondment can be done through a length that can go up to 6 months. Then it is expected to see in the project some communication and dissemination activities towards the scientific community through participation in conferences, organization of workshops, publications, to decision makers or to the market if your project is oriented towards the market. And there should also be some more specific activities that are foreseen for communicating science at large to the wider audience. So the IF, individual fellowship, is divided into pillars: the European fellowship pillars and the global fellowship pillars. The global fellowship pillars is basically supporting researchers that will undertake mobility in two phases. First, from a member state or an associated country to a third country. This is the outgoing phase that will last up to 2 years, and then a return phase in Europe in a host institution located in a member state or an associated countries for 1 year. Then we have, and this part is as a budget of 55 million euros. Then we have the European Fellowship pillar, which is divided in 4 types of actions. We have the standard fellowship to support mobility within Europe or from outside Europe to Europe. The career restart action that will support those researchers that have the career break in research and that would like to resume their career. The reintegration panel that will support the attraction of those researchers that left Europe but would like to come back to carry out their research. And finally, the Society and Enterprise Panel, where the fellowship will be undertaken in a non-academic institution. And for that one, we have a specific budget of 10 million euros. And then we have the widening fellowship, but I will come back to that. So overall, we have a total budget of 328 million euros. All those actions are subject to eligibility conditions, mobility conditions for every single actions, because this is the core of the program, training through mobility, geographical mobility, but also intersectoral mobility in some cases. There is no nationality condition, with some exceptions for the reintegration panel and the global fellowship. And there are also some specific eligibility conditions that are linked to the different panels. In fact, you have to demonstrate a career break for the career restart panel, or that you are going to a non-academic institution for the Society and Enterprise panel. So, European Fellowship, the biggest pillar. It's supporting basically experienced researchers that will undertake a project of 1 year to 2 years through mobility within Europe or from outside Europe to Europe. The first panel, the standard panel, is actually the most successful panel in terms of application and in terms of project funded. Almost 2/3 of the projects funded are coming from this standard panel. And here there is no nationality condition at all. And there is a mobility rule, which is the following. The researcher should not have worked or lived in the country where he wants to, or she wants to undertake a mobility more than 1 year before the 3 years before the call deadline. In the case of refugee or research at risk, the time spent to obtain the refugee status will not be counted in this mobility rule. And this is the case for the 5 type of actions. Any time spent in obtaining refugee status will not be counted under this eligibility conditions for mobility. Then we have the career restart panel, where we will support those researchers that had the career break to resume their career in research. They could have had the break for personal reason, parental leave, sickness, or professional reason, different career paths or unemployment periods. In that case, the mobility condition, the mobility rule is that the researcher should not have spent more than 3 years over the past 5 years before the call deadline in the country where he or she would like to undertake their fellowship. And then there is a specific eligibility conditions where linked to the career break, where the researcher will have to explain to what extent he or she had 1 year of career break at least over the past year and a half before the court deadline. Then we have the Reintegration Panel, where here I forgot to mention one eligibility rule, which is about direct mobility. So we are supporting those researchers that would like to come to Europe in order to undertake their research. And we like to attract them back. So we need a direct mobility from a third country, from a non-member state or associated country to Europe. And there we need first direct mobility, and then we expect the researchers not to have spent more than 3 years over the past 5 years before the call deadline in the country where they want to do their fellowship. Here, there is also a nationality condition. It's open to all nationalities with some limited conditions. First, it's open to all national from a member state or associated country. If not, the researcher should be able to demonstrate that before leaving Europe, he or she has spent as a permanent resident more than 5 years consecutive in Europe. But also it's important to note that in that case, those researchers that have a refugee status can also apply regardless of any nationality or residency condition. Then we have the Society and Enterprise Panel, where we will support those researchers that would like to undertake their fellowship in a non-academic institution, mainly industry, but not only. So one of the specific eligibility conditions is that the host organization should be non-academic, meaning that this host organization should not be a higher education institution that delivers diploma or no non-for-profit research organization, anything else. And then the specific mobility rules, the researcher should not have spent more than 3 years in the country where she or he wants to undertake his or her fellowship. Then we have the second pillar, the global fellowships, which is a project that is divided in 2 parts, an outgoing phase in a third country outside Europe. In most cases, it is in the US. This outgoing phase can last from 1 year to 2 years. You would need to identify in your proposal a partner organization and a supervisor in this partner organization. And then we have a second phase, which is the return phase, where the researcher will spend 1 year in the host institution that is located in Europe. Here, the eligibility conditions, the mobility rule, the researchers should not have spent more than 1 year before the 3 years before the call deadline in the third country where he or she would like to undertake the outgoing phase of the global fellowship. And there is also a nationality condition in the sense that it's open to researchers that are national from a member state or an associated country, or if not, that can demonstrate that they have a long-term resident of at least 5 consecutive years in Europe before leaving. Was a bit technical, but you will have the slide. You can also have a further look into it. And we also have questions, the possibility to ask questions that we can either answer directly or later on after the end of the webinar. In terms of financial support, we provide financial support through unit costs per month. We have 2 types of costs linked to the researchers and costs linked to the host institution. For the researcher, we have 4,880 euros that are dedicated to pay the salary, the tax, the pension scheme of the researchers. This amount is adjusted to the country where the fellowship takes place. Then we have an automatic monthly allowance of 600 euros for mobility. And for those researchers that are married, engaged in a civil partnership, or as children, there is the possibility to have an extra 500 euro allowance per month. Then we have the institutional cost. We have 800 euros per month that is dedicated for research, training, and networking activities. It's about 19,000 euros for a 2 years project. And this is meant to fund anything that is related to the research, being buying equipment, participating to conferences, organizing a workshop, whatever is linked to the research project per se. Then we have the 650 euros allowance for management and indirect costs that is meant for the host institution, but can also be used for the benefit of the researcher. So if you are in if you have a refugee status, or if you're in the process of obtaining, demanding a refugee status, it's very important that you tick, that you reply to this cause-specific question, so that the time spent during your application is not taken into account in the mobility and is not penalizing your application. However, it's also important to keep in mind that any time spent after the obtention of the refugee status will count as a normal mobility for any other scheme. In terms of nationality, for reintegration action, those researchers that have obtained a refugee status can apply regardless of nationality or residency condition, which is not the case for the global fellowship. Here, I will not go into the details. This is a summary in one slide of all the type of actions, the eligibility conditions, the duration of the projects. For you to know that also you can find on the back the number of ranking lists per scientific discipline or for specific actions and the total budget. So the call will open on the 8th of April with a call deadline on the 9th of September with total budget of 328 million. So it leaves you 8 months, a bit more, to find the right host institution and to start drafting your project application. Now I will say a quick word on widening fellowship, which is a specific scheme that we have developed in order to fund those applications that were successful, excellent, but did not manage to be successful enough to be retained for funding. So all those, this scheme allows you really to get an extra chance of being funded if you submit a proposal with an institution that is located in one of those countries that has a lower intensity in terms of research and innovation. You can find the list here. You have some from member states and others from associated countries. And with this scheme and a total budget of 7 million euros for next year, we will be able to fund an extra 45 projects from those countries. And what you have to do to increase your chance of getting funding is just to tick this box where you, in the application form, where you will have to formally agree that we transfer your application from the individual fellowship to the widening fellowship. Evaluation that is needed. Just for you also to know, a slide on some figures. So last year we received almost 10,000 proposals. We ended up with 1,351 proposals to be funded. The big bulk is under the standard actions. On the top right corner, you can see the success rates per action, where you can see 12% for standards, 18% for career restart panel, almost 20% for reintegration panel, 15% for society and enterprise in non-academic institution, and a bit more than 21% for global fellowship. A word on submission and evaluation. So submission is done online through the funding and tender portal. So, and your application is basically composed of 2 parts. It's a rather simple process. the part A, which is online, where you have to encode all the data that is linked to the host institutions, the details about your supervisor, your personal data, all your mobility periods as well. And this is where you will also be able to reply to those call-specific questions that I just referred to, the one on refugee status, or the one asking you if you want to take part in the widening fellowship. This is the part A, online. And then you have the second part of the application, the part B, which is basically the narrative, where you will have to explain your scientific and training projects in 10 pages. And it's very important to stick to those 10 pages because any additional page will be disregarded by the expert evaluators. So it's a rather simple process, very competitive, but simple in the sense that you need one host institution, one researcher, you, and the submission is a 10-page document. How does it work? Evaluation. All proposals are assigned to 3 different expert evaluators. All those 3 expert evaluators will reach a consensus on the score and on the comments attached to the score to justify that score. And based on that score, the proposal will put in a ranking list, and this will determine whether the project is selected for funding or not. And we intend to inform applicants about the results of their submission and the application in January, February 2021. So should you want to go further and to start writing an application, there is one document that should be your Bible, your Quran, your Torah, the basic documents that you should really keep next to you every time you go and start working on your application. Is the guide for applicants, where you will find all the information. This is this document. A word on the evaluation criteria. The evaluation is based on 3 main criteria: excellence, impact, implementation. With excellence, it's a criteria that is weighted 50% because we really want to support excellent research. And so the evaluators will assess the credibility of the project, the methodology, to what extent it goes beyond the state of the art. It will also be assessed the quality of the training and to what extent there is knowledge transfer, not only from the host institution to the researcher, but also from the researcher to the host institution. And it's really important also that that evaluators will look at the supervision of the researcher, the track record of the supervisor, and what are the hosting arrangements in the lab, in the team, within the host institution. Evaluators will also look at impact, to what extent the proposal, the project will give further career prospect to the researcher after the end of the fellowship. And they will also assess the impact of the measures that are proposed to disseminate the work to scientific audience, but also to non-scientific audience and the public at large. And finally, the implementation aspect. Under this criteria, the evaluators will look at the credibility of the work plan, the allocation of resources, what are the management structures foreseen for the projects, are the risk being identified, what kind of mitigation measures have been envisaged, and what is the overall infrastructures that is put at the disposal of the researchers. So for those 3 criteria, we have a weight, 50% for excellence, 30% for impact, and 20% for implementation. So as I said, whenever you want to start an application, you should really refer to this guide for applicants. As mentioned by Martin, national contact points are really there to help you in your application process. And okay, and yeah, and I thank you for your attention. Now I'm ready to take a question that we can reply straight away, or we can come back to you later on. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sami and Martin. So we've had a good number of questions come in during your presentation. In the Q&A section of the screen, you'll see under answered, we have sent some preliminary answers to people who have written in their questions. So I'd like to go through some of those now. First of all, just to reassure people that yes, we will be providing a link to the webinar recording and also to the PowerPoint presentations on our website after in a few days' time. You will also, for those of you who registered for the webinar directly, you will receive those links directly as well via your email. So let's now go through some of the questions that have that you have submitted, and I think most of these will be for Martin and Sami. So first question, for someone to apply, is English language a requirement?
Yes, I would say. I only saw application in English. I need to double check if it's in the guide for applicants. So far, all the proposals that I've seen have been submitted in English, and since we have experts evaluated from all over the world, it's also a common language that is used for the evaluation.
Maybe I can add that we have that question relatively often, and there's still for this year it would remain the same, but I think there are some discussions about opening up for other languages. But I think those discussions will be a bit difficult to answer. And basically, for all the EU funding programs, English is the most likely only language that will remain for applications.
Okay, the second question that's come in here, and I should also say that we have agreed with Martin and Sami that after this webinar, we'll put together a short document of frequently asked questions, and we can also post that to the website to give responses to some of the questions you're raising here. Next question, I think Marie Curie Fellowship is a general fellowship and not for people experiencing risk and displacement. It is difficult to compete with regular researchers.
I can answer that maybe. That's exactly our perception in the last years, that first of all, that there's a feeling that if you have a different CV or background than the standard European one where you go to university and then you engage in research work, and you have the the list of publication, then you have higher chances at MSCA. But however, I think we learned from that experience, and we are now saying, okay, the mobility rule is not there. It's easier for researchers at risk. Furthermore, we are also letting know the evaluators that when they have a CV of somebody who has the status of a researcher at risk, this should be not seen as an impediment or an obstacle, and that should be they should be open to a diversity of biographies. No, sorry. Okay, and there was one more thing. I don't know. I don't remember it. But in fact, what we are striving for is a level playing field for all kinds of CVs. And now it comes back. In the past, we had calls where people who had a refugee status actually did not mention that in the application process. And I think that it was disadvantageous for them because then their CV had some gaps. And it is our impression that sometimes if you have a refugee status, you prefer not to mention it because you think it will reflect badly at you. This is not the case at the individual fellowships. This is not the case at MSCA.
Yeah, just to complement and give a bit of perspective, the program has been conceived first as a program that will support excellence in science, and this is where afterwards we inserted some specific modalities, implementation modalities for those researchers that have refugee status, in order to limit the penalization linked to this specific status. So there is also an historical background why the situation is like this, and that's to recall also that it does not be meant for refugees only, as we can have in other initiatives elsewhere in Europe.
Yeah. Maybe just to finish, is our idea of MSCA is a program that gives access to the best brains, to the best ideas, irrespective of where they're coming from, on which topic they're focusing. It's really the excellence of the program. And that's also part of the renommee or the image of MSCA, that when you have a fellowship, you're doing that because you're an excellent researcher. Obviously, there's the point that we don't have enough funding that we can basically fund everybody who's excellent, because we can fund maybe around 15% of the applicants, because then we don't have money left. But we receive a lot of excellent applications, and if you are above, let's say, 80 points, it actually reflects that it's an excellent proposal. And this is our aim, irrespective of your background and your CV. It is really the excellence in the research proposed that is, I think, the most decisive factor.
Okay, let's continue through the questions. There are a few questions that are in a similar vein. The next question maybe you could address: as far as I know, we apply for individual fellowships in collaboration with a host institute. That means each institute would have different deadlines? Question mark. Do we contact the host institutions first?
Okay. So there are several questions in your questions. You can first, how to submit, how to find the right host institution. There are several channels. Having talked with various fellows, it can be based on an individual personal relationship with researchers in one of the host institutions that is envisaged. But I also met some fellows that sent emails explaining, identifying one potential supervisor, explaining what the project would look like, and then starting from there. Then how to contact the host institution is really between the researcher and the host institution, having in mind that only one application can be submitted by a researcher to one call, while an host institution can submit several applications. So one application per researcher, while one university can submit several applications with several researchers. And each application is individual.
Okay, thank you, Sami. Another question, and there were a few questions in this area also. What are conditions that apply to researchers of any nationality that do not apply to researchers with refugee status, in particular as it regards mobility? So I think that this question was addressed by Sami in your presentation. Could you maybe repeat or clarify the rule or the relaxed mobility rule for those in the refugee process?
So whenever you had the time spent to obtain a refugee status, whether or not you have obtained it yet, this time spent during the procedure will not be taken into account for the mobility rule. However, if once the researcher has obtained his or her refugee status, then the mobility applies as for any other researcher. This is the case for the 5 type of action that we have. In the case of the Reintegration Panel, there is a nationality condition. In that case, this nationality condition does not apply for those researchers that have obtained refugee status.
Okay. And so, Sami, as a follow-up to that, if someone has received refugee status and is then working towards citizenship in a given EU country, any additional time spent once the refugee status has been approved, then they're back to the normal mobility rules. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. There's another question that I will just quickly address. It says, does the current project, so meaning the Inspire Europe project, have individual support to offer for applications? So I would say we do on a limited basis. So as part of the Inspire Europe project, we are organizing a pilot scheme of one-to-one coachings. And those are, at the moment, we will have places for something between 10 and 30 scholars or researchers over 3 years for individual advisory services. In addition to the individual services, we'll continue with webinars like this over the 3 years that will be open to all. But of course, that's not tailored to individual situations, but we will also have face-to-face trainings. And those will be held in partnership with the annual Pause events in Paris and the annual Philip Schwartz Initiative events in Germany. And you will all receive information about those as when they come up. But please, for those of you who are eligible for Marie Curie individual fellowships and who are interested in being considered for the coaching services, please write to that same email address. So it's inspireurope@mu.ie. Just to return to some of the questions for Martin and Sami, I realize time is tight. It says, for the last year, what was the acceptance rate for projects in the MSCA individual fellowships?
The success rate was 12% for the standard fellowship, which is the main action that received the biggest pool of applications. It was 18% for career restarts, I think 19% for Reintegration Panel, 15% for Society and Enterprise, and 21% for Global Fellowship. This information is in the slides where I provide all the figures about the goal.
Okay. Another question, is the living allowance taxable?
Yes, the living allowance is the amount that is given to the host institution. And with this amount, the host institution will have to pay taxes. And then it's also implied the gross salary of the researcher and pension contribution or health insurance contributions.
Okay. Another question, can a refugee from Turkey apply for the Reintegration Panel even though his or her country is an associated country?
Can you say it again, please?
Yep. Can a refugee from Turkey apply for the Reintegration Panel even though his or her country is an associated country?
Well, this is in the details. There should be a direct mobility from a third country, meaning that a country that is not a member state or an associated country, to one member state or associated country. And in that case, the status of refugee avoid that we apply the nationality condition. I don't know if it was clear or not.
I think actually maybe this next question will help to clarify it. My understanding is the individual asking the question, because they have a second question attached, is currently in Europe. So the time within the EU, the time for obtaining refugee status is not counted. But I would like to know whether the time spent with a fellowship from Pause or the Philip Schwartz Initiative is counted or not. My understanding is the answer is no, but please.
No, the answer is no, as far as I understand. Then you will have to see if there is direct mobility. If you, for instance, if you had you arrived 5 years ago in Europe, it took 3 years to get the refugee status. This time is not counted. So for the 3 years, within the five years, it's okay. But then you don't have direct mobility, meaning that you are in Europe, so you're not coming from a third country to Europe. So in that case, for instance, it's not eligible. But then it might be eligible for another panel. And when we really try to be supportive with our applicants, when we see that an application is not eligible within one panel, we see if we can transfer this application to another panel.
Okay, there's a question here that Martin partly answered in the context of refugees. It says, I am an academic at risk and I will be applying to the MSCA individual fellowship. I am not sure if being at risk will affect my application. Therefore, I am reluctant to mention it. Should I indicate this in my application?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it before. Here in that concrete case, it is mention your academic address status in your application, because it probably will make your CV clearer, more understandable. And you know, if you just mention it at all, you might have a gap in your CV that probably will be will be not positive, let's say, for the evaluation. However, once you have an MSCA fellowship, nobody will see that as a fellowship because you are academic at risk, or you know, the old issues of affirmative action and so on don't play a role. You are an individual fellow of MSCA, and it's independent of you being academic at risk or not. So my suggestion is to mention it, to explain your CV and also your background without being silent about that, because it will not be to your detriment.
And yeah, just to complement, the application will not be penalized at all for this reason. Which might be obvious, but better to say it.
Okay, might I suggest that we take 3 more questions? We're already over time, and then we can try to compile any remaining questions and either respond to them individually or in that frequently asked questions document that I mentioned that'll be made available on our website. So looking for questions that are representative of a number of questions. Assessing the background of the candidate, does the relevant panel only look to publications? Is professional experience in areas other than research also relevant?
Yes, yes. The evaluation is made on what is on the CV of the researcher. So whatever can complement the purely scientific track records will be assessed accordingly.
Maybe if you look also at the official documents, we always say that MSCA fellowships are very open, that we support international, interdisciplinary, intersectorial work. So maybe the more you are away from a very standard way, the more interesting your application is. And so if you have experience in other areas that are related and relevant for the research project that you have, I think that would be also positive for the evaluation. Of course, if you mention something that is not related, just to fill in the pages, of course, that will probably not be helpful. But if you have in your proposal a narrative that explains why you are the right person for this particular research and how important that research will be and how excellent it would be, then I think your application would be stronger.
Thank you, Martin. So 2 final questions. Is a scholar with a refugee status granted by any EU country eligible to apply for an EU-funded fellowship to be held outside his or her country of asylum when it is up to 2 or more years?
So, I think so, yes.
Well, I'm not familiar with specific national laws, but for what regards the individual fellowship modality of implementation, I would say yes, provided that all eligibility conditions are met.
Yeah, so basically if you have a refugee status, let's say in Germany, and you apply for individual fellowship in France, that should be fine.
So this question will also have implications for the residency rights of the refugee upon return to the first state. So might I suggest also that we take up this question in another webinar where we will organize for expert speakers specifically on this area of intra-EU mobility for those in the asylum seeking process or with refugee status and who are looking to meet residency requirements in order to apply for citizenship, for example. So we would very much like to organize a separate training or a separate webinar on this topic, as there are a number of questions in this vein. Maybe one final question before we leave it for today. Okay, some of these are in the same vein. If I spent the last 12 months for a Humboldt Fellowship, so meaning a Philip Schwartz Initiative Fellowship, and I can't go back to my home country because of the risks involved, will those 12 months still be counted? I assume that be counted here means in terms of meeting the mobility rule. So perhaps this is along the same, you have answered this question in another way before. Did you want to say anything again on this, Martin?
I think that if those 12 months are outside, let's say, the asylum procedure, it's just 12 months of stay. It counts as 12 months staying in Germany. And that would apply also to others without research academics at risk status, for example, or asylum status. So those are the 12 months in Germany that counted on that.
Great. Thank you so much to Martin and to Sami and to all of you, the participants, for the excellent questions. Because there were over 70 people attending the webinar, we were not able to have a live discussion. So I hope you're okay with the question and answer format that we're using. We would really welcome your feedback on this webinar, and we'll be providing a survey within the next day or two, and we invite you to complete that and to send us your further suggestions also for topics. So thank you so much to everyone.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. And one small comment. I just quickly saw that someone was asking about the results of the call this year. Mm-hmm. The results of the call will be notified most probably the first week of February.
First week of February. So that's for people who applied last September. Yes. Thank you very much to everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.